Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We turn now to one of the most anthologized, famous, important poems of Emily Dickinson's, over poem 216 in the Johnson edition, as we are referencing our poetry from that edition as opposed to the Franklin edition, and that's significant for this poem. This is an interesting poem because we know probably more about the composition of this poem than any other single poem of the collection of the 1,775 poems of the Johnson edition. And in that regards, it's a fascinating study in its own right. When it was first published in the Springfield Daily Republican of 1 March 1862, it was titled "The Sleeping." Think about that date of March the 1st, 1862, right? The Civil War starts the 12th of April, 1861. So we're already into a year of a lot of death. This is going to be a poem, obviously, about death. The Alabaster Chambers that are referenced here will, of course, be the coffins where people are buried. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net down that left-hand side. Again, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm very hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments, and I'm very hopeful that you've already worked through the previous 215 poems. We just finished with 215, What is Paradise? Now, this poem is fascinating because it has at least 2 different versions, although she wrote 4 of them, and no one's completely clear which one of them she was most pleased with. Her exchanges with Sue, her brother's wife, and of course her deep friend, if not lover, will play a profound role in the multiple versions of this poem. We're going to look at that a little bit as we get into this. We are in some ways back to poem 115 that we've already studied. What in is this? And of course the very notion of meeting death and the like. As well, promise of resurrection will be central to this poem in some ways. Now, remember that Emily, we said this already, Emily lived where she could see a cemetery. So this idea that she is writing about the things she sees out her window will make a lot of sense. I want you to pay attention to all the S, T, and R sounds of this poem. And again, as we said, Emily wrote 4 different versions of this poem. And it's fascinating. She wrote her first version in 1859. She showed it to Sue, apparently, who criticized the poem. And then in 1861, Emily sends Sue a version with a new second stanza, and she adds the comment, quote, "Perhaps this verse will suit you better," and then the name Sue. And Johnson will supply us with both of these. Now, Sue's reply was that the new stanza didn't go so well with the quote-unquote ghostly simmer of the first stanza, and indeed the first stanza might be a stronger poem, possibly just on its own. Emily will write other variants, and then ultimately she'll even ask, is this frostier? As we look at the two different versions of this poem, let's do it. We'll read the first one, and then we'll read the second one. And of course, it's a great advantage if you have the poems in front of you so that you can see the differences, specifically, of course, in the second stanza. Safe in their alabaster chambers, untouched by morning and untouched by noon, sleep the meek members of the resurrection, rafter of satin and roof of stone. Light laughs the breeze in her castle above them, babbles the bee in a stolid ear, pipe the sweet birds in ignorant cadence. Ah, what sagacity perished here. And do notice the exclamation point at the conclusion of the first version of 1859. Now let's look at the version of 1861. Notice the first stanza, the only difference is in primarily punctuation. Safe in their alabaster chambers, untouched by morning and untouched by noon, lie the meek members of the resurrection, rafter of satin and roof of stone. Grand go the years in the crescent above them, worlds scoop their acres and firmaments row, diadems drop and doges surrender, soundless as dots on a disk of snow. Now, there's been a lot of ink spilled in comparing these 2 versions of this poem. I'd like to first of all just concentrate on the first stanza. Notice we begin with the word safe and we move to the word sleep. It is interesting that when she uses the word safe, she's talking about the dead. Safe from what? You know, it's an interesting question. Alabaster Chambers, when we get to Alabaster, she used it in 2 other poems, but specifically in poem 1384, she'll play this game. Let's look at it real fast. Poem 1384, she says it this way. and I find this a fascinating poem. I mean, we're already obviously setting ourselves up for study that's coming. She says, "Praise it, 'tis dead, it cannot glow. Warm this inclement ear with the encunium it earned, since it was gathered here. Invest this alabaster zest in the delights of dust, remitted since it flitted it in recursion August." Now, I find this interesting. Alabaster, of course, the interior of a coffin, right? Notice the dead are safe. They're untouched by morning, untouched by noon, and then we get the word sleep. Now, interesting, in the second version of this, it was lie and not sleep. Much has been made of this. By the way, the word sleep here is a reference, an allusion most likely to 1 Corinthians 15:18, those fallen asleep in Christ. Sleep, notice it's the meek members. Meek takes us to Matthew 5, and of course the meek shall inherit the earth. Members of the resurrection. Now, of course, this is a theological understanding for Emily, that the dead are buried in their coffins, but there will come this day of resurrection when they will be reunited with Christ. Notice then she'll come back to the coffins with rafter of satin and roof of stone. By the way, notice the use of the dash in the second version, the 1861 version. It's the second part of this poem that then starts to become interesting. Light laughs the breeze in her castle above them. In other words, life goes on, right? Life goes on. Babbles the bee in a stolid ear. Pipe the sweet birds in ignorant cadence. In other words, life goes on, nature goes on. And then her use of the word ah here takes us back. She does this a number of times. You'll remember in poem 34, she did it for the first time. What sagacity, wisdom, perished here. Now, it's with the exclamation point. So there seems to be a suggestion how tragic it is that after all of the lives lived, that in the end, life goes on, and what is lost in death is, of course, the wisdom that of those who came before. Notice the second version, the version that some have called for Sue, to try and answer Sue's criticism. Grand go the years, and you can see the tone is quite different. In the crescent above them, so notice it's the castle to the crescent. Worlds scoop their acres, it's an interesting verb, scoop, and firmaments row, diadems drop, doges surrender. In other words, death is the great equalizer. We think obviously of Hamlet and that classic statement of the egalitarian nature of death in Hamlet Act 4. You'll remember when he talks about how a king may go a progress through the guts of a beggar. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on that play and on especially that scene. Notice, finally, the dead are soundless as dots. It's an interesting simile on a disk of snow. Notice the rhyming here of row and snow. Notice all of your S and T and R sounds. What exactly is Emily doing in a poem like this? Well, I think there's a couple of different ways to interpret this poem. One is that nature is somewhat indifferent to the dead once they are gone, and no matter how sagacious they were, no matter how wise they were. Here it reminds us of Teasdale's There Will Come Soft Rains, that classic poem. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. The other argument that could be made here is that death removes, tragically, the wisdom of those who came before. And that's obviously a bit of loss of hope, we might argue. At 2b, again, we commented on the use of rhyme, row, and snow, and of course the S sound, the T sound, the R sounds. This is a fun poem to read out loud. At 3a, what can we relate this to? Well, when we get to poem 449, one of her most famous poems, we'll come back to this poem when we do this. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb when one who died for truth was laid in an adjoining room. He questioned softly why I failed. For beauty, I replied, and I for truth. themselves are one. We brethren are, he said. And so as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names. This idea that we die, and what is lost, what is gained. Remember, the first word of this poem is safe, after all. And as we commented, poem 1384 as well. But I want to comment on Gray's Elegy in a Country Churchyard from 1751. We've given full lectures on this poem at learnstrong.net. Think about the power of that image of those who are far from the madding crowd and the like. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, which version of these two poems do you like better? Which one do you find is more compelling, the first or the second? I have a hard time deciding which one of the two I like the best, usually the one I'm reading at the time. Thank you.